Hi, welcome to Dear Art Producer. I'm your host, Heather Elder, and today is October 16th, 2023, and we are recording our 100th episode. We are joined by Sandra Gomez, Senior VP Group Director in Creative Production at FCB Health, part of the IPG network. Sandra manages a fantastic group of creative producers working across their networks. She's hung her hat at Patience and Purpose, MRM, and Rap Worldwide. She loves strong coffee, collaborative playlists, and has a thing or two for disco balls. Welcome, Sandra.
Hi,
how are
Heather.
you today?
Very well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, are you kidding? You and I have been trying to record this for so long, and I am so honored to have you be my 100th guest. I mean, if I can just take a minute to say how incredibly proud and excited I am to actually say that we have 100 episodes, and to thank all of our listeners and all of the art producers and people out there who have provided such incredible insight into our industry and really helped everyone, all of our listeners out there get to know what it is that we do. So it's just amazing that we are 100. So thank you, everyone. And absolutely thank you, Sandra, for being here. You are the perfect guest for this. Your insights and your valuable experience are very much appreciated. So thank you for being here with me today.
Well, you're welcome. It's a mutual honor. Congratulations to you and all of your esteemed guests. 100 episodes is quite an accomplishment. So congratulations to you.
Thank you. If it weren't for COVID, I'm not quite sure I would have gotten this far. But it's been great. I've learned a lot. It's pretty amazing just what people are willing to share. And even having been in the business for as long as I have been, I do feel like I learn something every time I do a podcast. So this is great. Let's get into it. I like to always start off kind of getting to know our guests that are on our show. And I'd love to kind of learn a little bit about the path that you've taken to get to your job. You know, where did you start? How did you end up doing what you're doing?
Sure. Boy, let me dig back. I began my advertising career with a small marketing company. I was a production assistant, and part of my role was maintaining a physical archive of our product film and color proofs. Was still back in the days of film for our various clients. And we would pair our financial institution clients with our advertisers. Did that for about a year, and that led into a creative production assistant role at my first large agency. Really, my passion for illustration and photography came together with my desire to make things. I very much liked tactile creation and having that creative pursuit come into the physical world. So it really found its match. I was creative portfolio Grand Central for a time, looking up the books and setting up creative in-persons for my large creative team, liaising with artists and agencies. It was really an exciting time, and it was so fun to be super young and in a creative pursuit. And the team was wonderful, and it was really an exciting time. From there, I actually transitioned fully into print production. So for many years, my career focused on agency in terms of projects for actual commercial print. So manufacturing, managing the creation of collateral, print deliverables, lots of specialty kits, intricate bindery, lots of tactile things. And it ran the gamut: our airline, automotive, insurance, some healthcare, and also worked for the New York Times as a client for a while. So lots of exciting variety there. I think learning that craft was really exciting for me. There was a lot of high-end retouching that I managed, but there was also substrate exploratory. So there's chemistry and science in that manufacturing when you're getting ink on paper or fabric or plastic or whatever substrate we were on. And I was responsible for those projects from initial ideation, bidding, final delivery. It was really an adventure. And I think being curious and always being a sponge for learning, I think I'm still that way. That curiosity was definitely held in high regard. With the partners that I was working with, those actual craftsmen and women being makers, I remember going on very long press checks, lots of color approvals, and working with clients, and being on the new side and being invited into the pre-press room and being invited onto the press floor consistently with those head pressmen and women, but mostly men. It was definitely a male-dominated field. That meant a lot to me as well because they trusted my ability to partner with them and really get into the science of it. So lots of sweet memories about that. And then my production journey continued. I went into my first agency that focused on healthcare and in particular, the patient and caregiver experience. It's a wonderful agency. Truly, they felt that any idea from any department or position that you were in was welcomed. It was the seed for really great work. And I enjoyed the people that I worked with and really looking at things from the patient and caregiver perspective. Up to that point, I'd done commercial work. And while there's lots of reward in doing creativity for selling product and really great automotive, I worked on Mercedes-Benz for a while. It was rewarding. But at that point in my career, I was looking for something that perhaps brought a bit more meaning into what we do in the everyday. And certainly starting to work in advertising and considering the patient and caregiver and true lived experience, it defined my work in a new way.
Wow, that's amazing. Your path is absolutely varied, and it's no wonder you're in the position that you are in today. Sounds like you've been surrounded by incredibly creative and supportive people, and you're giving back with that now. And I love the idea that you are so appreciative of the patient experience, and here you are in the role that you are currently in, getting to do all of those things that kind of informed who you were in the early years. But before we move on, I do want to thank you for all those amazing portfolio shows that you coordinated back in the day.
My pleasure.
I miss them a lot. They were always really fun. And I know that they're a lot of work. So thank you for doing that when you did them.
My pleasure. We've continued those. COVID and the pandemic and working remotely gave a lot of different opportunities. And so we continued those virtually.
Yes.
Well, them once a month. And it's a way to stay connected. So less muscle building, but certainly we are connected.
That's awesome. Well, tell me about the role as a senior VP group director at FCB Health. What can you share with us about that role?
Well, my evolution continued from print into digital. I started to manage some brands across digital and print tactics. And then I moved into my role at FCB Health, an IPG health company. So as you said in my intro, I lead a fantastic group of creative producers and licensing specialists. And we work across a network of agencies for clients predominantly in the healthcare space. I'd say a key part of my role does focus on how we do what we do as producers. So establishing solid methods and framework, I think that gives space for passion and focus on craft. If you can really nail down the mechanics of how you communicate things and how we work together from a production perspective, it allows for that excitement and joy and the headspace, really. We still get to create art as part of our profession, original art. And I think that's pretty spectacular. It's always exciting and demanding and never gets old. But certainly operationally, I think we're highly skilled. And we're an organized group, super clever and compassionate and driven and supportive of one another. It's a great group.
You've said a couple of words there that really stick out to me. Joy, which is really important. I think sometimes we forget that this is a fun job, right? There's so many deadlines and disappointments and, structure and things that don't always go our way. So it's really nice to hear you use the word joy. And clever. I love that you use the word clever because I feel like your whole team I've worked closely with so many of them. And I think clever is such a great word to choose because everyone is really working towards a really positive, strong solution. And you do have to be clever to kind of, figure out, it's a puzzle, right? You have to figure out how to make it work. So, all the other words absolutely made sense as well, but those really stood out to me. So I'm going to try and use clever more.
It's along the lines of resourceful, but clever is really an active listener, right?
Yeah.
An active thinker and putting those pieces together. And it's funny you say puzzle because as I was looking through some of my notes, that puzzle word came to mind. So I think we're vibing on some words here.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so what are you known for on your team?
I think approachability. I get that a lot from my team where they always know that I can really see things from different perspectives and they don't ever need to feel like there's something that they can't come to me with. So I'd say approachability, a real sense of community, establishing that connective tissue really creates a strong collaborative environment for the producers, which is so important. I think we're at our best when we share freely of our knowledge, our experience, and our point of view. So if each individual is powered by this amazing collective, I do think that just about anything is possible.
Well, I can say firsthand that you are all of those things. I see it reflected in the team that you work with. And I've had to have hard conversations with you. And you are incredibly approachable. And I felt that connective tissue. It was always a very respectful conversation. And I learned from you in those moments. And you were, an active listener for sure. So, yep, I can vouch for you for sure.
I appreciate that. I would say that I tend probably to be a bit more behind the curtain. So you sharing that, thank you, that came across and that resonated. That means a lot to hear that from you, Heather. So thank you.
Oh, of course. Okay. So what would be helpful for maybe artists or photographers, directors, anyone, and reps to understand better about your job?
Well, I think that understanding the deep passion that producers have for creative output and craft, while the producers are responsible for so much when we think about the actual planning of a production and all that goes into it. You've got an experienced audience. You can imagine location, considerations for the client, the casting. There's so much that goes into it, but truly the producers have such a deep passion for that creative output. If you ask any of the producers, they'd probably say to you that one of their most favorite parts of their job is to view work from artists that they've worked with for years and also discovering new ones. They understand all that goes into a photographer and a rep or an illustrator or a CGI artist, all that goes into being considered for a project. So they do their best to pair an artist to a campaign. They'll articulate in as much detail as possible what the goals are, what the production needs, all those intricacies to really set everyone up for success. I think that's probably what I'd want to leave you with in terms of what they're passionate about.
Yeah, no, and it's very noticeable, from where I sit. I've been fortunate enough to work with your team. And I also work with plenty of other people out there. And there's many, many amazing producers out there. But there are also some that aren't passionate and they're just checking off the to-do list and doing the minimal and making us ask the extra questions and, making us feel more like a vendor or just like someone out there executing something. And when we work with the FCB Health team, we don't feel like that. We definitely feel the collaboration, and your team they're great communicators. And whenever we get a FCB Health bid form, we are very happy because they're just so detailed and thought through. And, it's not just an email that says, hey, can you give me a bid for this layout? There's, a lot of thought that goes into it. So it's definitely driven by passion.
I think so much of it is understanding your audience, and your audience, you tailor your communication to really give the information to who you're speaking to. So I can imagine you as a rep being on the receiving end of drips and drabs of information, not having a clear picture, but the expectation of your output is the same. You need a comprehensive bid. You are talking to your photographer about a treatment. So really articulating that information in a clear way and having that conversation and that great spec sheet, it gives you the ability to be nimble.
Yeah.
Time is always of the essence. So I'm glad it's being received that way.
Oh, yeah. I want you guys to put it out there as a template for everyone else. I just find them so helpful. So
that's wonderful.
Absolutely. Okay. So what do you love about your job? I could probably guess, but I want to hear your answer.
I mean, I know I keep talking about the team. The group is just, they surprise me every day with their ability to left brain and right brain and think creatively and think strategically. So I'd say it's different every day. I think for me, the transition into healthcare focused work, I mentioned earlier, it definitely reinvigorated my interest in advertising, that deeper purpose beyond creating beautiful work and selling more things, but really getting into the lived experience of people as they face different health conditions, different things that need treatment. So I'd say that's a really important part of what I love about my job. And, our creative production group as a whole, it's an impressive collective of producers. People talk about production and producers, but there's also incredible business management, talent, traffic. We're this large ecosystem, our licensing specialists, this ecosystem of production expertise. It's working together to really produce impactful and thoughtful work. And I'm grateful to all of the people that I get to partner with. It's quite a team.
I really like how you keep bringing it back to the healthcare, the meaningfulness uniqueness of working on accounts like that. I think it's really important to remember. And I think sometimes people think about it as like, oh, we have a new job to bid on. And they're not really thinking about the deeper aspect of what's involved in this project. And I interviewed someone the other day and I was asking them about treatments, and they worked on pharma as well. And they were saying something that really stood out to them was this idea of when an artist really connects with the brand and the drug and the team and recognizes, and the patients and the reason. And there's a sense of empathy and understanding for what's happening, because you guys don't create that ad in just like a day. There's a lot of time and energy that's put into understanding the drug and the brand and all of that. And I think it's really great to hear you say how meaningful that is to you, as a reminder to everyone out there who's working on pharma advertising, that it needs to be equally as meaningful for the people who are fortunate enough to be awarded the job. And I would think that is something that really stands out when they are.
It's such an opportunity. I mean, certainly in the industry for a long time, perhaps it wasn't seen as desirable to work on pharma as, potentially other sort of more commercial brands and clients. And I think when you've done that for a while, and then you have your first experience where you're listening to a patient ambassador talk about how they won't make plans in advance because their condition keeps them from wanting to commit to graduations, to birthdays, or the embarrassment that may come along with having a condition that makes it so hard to talk about. Shame can be such a driver of so many things. And I think a lot of the disease state awareness work that we do, really talking about conditions and what it's like, it eliminates that shame and gives a voice to the fact that all of us may deal with or have loved ones that deal with, and caregivers can sometimes know just as much, if not more, than the patients themselves, because medical knowledge can be overwhelming when it's you that's the patient. So coming through that lens, it definitely, maybe I was having a little bit of burnout at that point in my career, and switching to pharma gave me a whole new perspective on, because producers work hard, we work long hours. And so to feel like perhaps you're part of something different, it definitely resonated with me. So
that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about your team for a little bit. What does a successful art production team look like?
Well, I'd like to think it looks like us.
I like that.
The producers are they're incredibly talented, but they're also super respectful of one another. They appreciate the acumen and effort that each one brings to the group. They're very thoughtful and quick to connect the dots and invent new ones if those dots haven't been invented. So I think really it's the supportive environment, the knowledge share. It's so important to have that open door amongst producers. Each of them has sort of these folks that they'll go to, or we have a group chat where we'll ask about photographers or locations or talent. And it's that open collaboration that I think in any field or industry makes for the best work, and everyone's very good and kind to each other.
I would also say that is the reason, I would guess, that your team is so cool under pressure, right? They feel supported. So when something comes through their email or across their desk, or there's a situation happening on a production that's not ideal, every job gets thrown some curveballs. And I've been on those jobs with your people, and they are so not reactive, in a negative way. They can handle it. And I think they're all about finding the solutions and figuring it out. And my guess is it's because they feel supported and they're not operating from fear. So, and it makes a difference for sure.
That energy is so important. I remember talking to an account person after a particularly challenging shoot, I would say, just not for the production, but for weather and lots of different things. And it was one of our clients' first experience. And, because they felt like if I was there, the producer is charged with making sure that everything is okay, but also making everyone feel like things will be okay. And they sort of look to get a temperature test from the producer. And I think it's great to hear that that's been your experience, that the producers feel supported and are able to navigate what comes. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, how do you foster a positive and productive work environment for your team?
Well, every question is a valid one. I know that sounds cliche, but establishing an environment truly where questions and continual learning and sharing is the norm. It's so important. What doesn't exist today may exist tomorrow. And the lens and nuance for each project is so different. So a question you may have asked 6 months ago, overlaid with the sort of puzzle pieces of a particular client or a campaign or budget or timing, each is so unique. And the producers artfully assemble those pieces with creative, with account, our client teams, and with you, the external artists and partners that we work with. So I think having that open communication and that welcoming environment, ask anything of any of your colleagues, is super important.
And you feel that throughout the entire FCB Health network?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. And we're large and there's lots of different, styles and personalities that you might have across the agencies, but there's definitely open communication. And that's, I think, the key to every success.
What kind of systems have you implemented or prioritized to streamline the production process and ensure success? So we already kind of touched upon the bid spec sheet, but of course, feel free to elaborate if you want. But, you guys are so good at the processes and operations. I'd love to hear more about that.
I think, again, we talk about, obviously, there were so many hard things that happened and lots of struggles that people dealt with these past 3-4 years. But it also gave us the opportunity to create a tool, I would say. We have a SharePoint that we created, and that brought in all of the tools that we've mentioned. So it's our spec sheet, our casting specs, all of the documents, anything that you would need to function well as a producer and also at our agency. We put that together. So there was a one place, one-stop shop, if you will, to go for all of your needs. And that became critically important. Producers were always well suited to the remote work environment because we've been doing that for most of our careers, but it was the rest of the world that was catching up to that remoteness in some aspects as well. So it's been going 2 years strong now. We have a SharePoint that's internal for producers and also one that we have for our teams to learn a bit more about what we do. We've got some decks on, roles on set and production overviews. So I think, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. And so the pandemic certainly necessitated different ways to connect. And we did that.
So the pandemic also brought remote work, which, as you mentioned earlier, we were already doing as producers, right? That wasn't something really new for us. But I still think when you're mostly remote, you have to facilitate some pretty effective communication tools and really embrace collaboration on a different level with your team and other departments. How do you do that?
And I think it's talking. I meet with my producers once a week, but the producers are meeting with each other. When I say once a week, that's formally, but we're constantly collaborating and talking, whether it's that I'm getting involved in a project at the beginning, at the middle, or sort of troubleshooting. So I think that we may even talk more now. Certainly when we were in person, there was an open environment and noise could have been a factor or people traveling could have been a factor, but we truly have more access to one another than we did before. So presented the need to connect in an entirely virtual way. And we found ways to do that. And again, the relationships that we had established prior, it just dovetailed very well into working remotely.
Yeah, I think the relationships, it's such an important part, and working remotely makes that hard, right? You want to be able to grow those more. And it just sounds like you value it so much that you put the time into it in a way that really pays off. So that's amazing. Let me ask you about some of the biggest challenges your department faces and how you work with your team to overcome them.
I'd say probably continuing education. A big part of the producer's role is really continuing education of what a production is and all that it entails. So there can be lots of firsts that we need to navigate. It could be for teams and clients that are embarking on their first ever photo, CGI or illustration production, their first remote production during the pandemic, or their first in-person production after a year of campaign creation and testing. So I think it's really continuing to educate on what's involved, the time that it takes. And that is true, I'd say, across every project and every team. And hand in hand with that goes timing, really making sure that ample time, as much as we can, given all of the deadlines that we have, the reviews that we have, but timing can sometimes be a perpetual challenge that we're facing. So educating on that is continual. And I would probably say that if a 25-hour, 8-day week is ever created, you sort of had their hands in the making of that.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think education is really interesting, as a business owner who has employees at many different levels in their career. I think what is missing in the remote working world, at least from my point of view, is what you learn through osmosis, right? When we were all sitting around, hearing each other on the phone, getting to quickly discuss something rather than scheduling a call. And you have to work harder at it to really, make sure everyone is saying the same thing, understands it from the same point of view, can share their insights and add to the conversation. So we have to think about it. And it's something very important.
Yeah, I think you have to prioritize it. I love that you said osmosis, because that's truly where so much learning happens. If you're in a group and you're exchanging ideas and you hear somebody's working on something, or there's a conversation that's happening, there's that organic ability to, your ears perk up, you absorb, you ask questions. And so I think you have to make it a priority to create that in a remote environment, to not be afraid to ask those questions. And so that's where it comes in. You're not going to have those organic opportunities, but you have that connective tissue that you can ask questions and create that environment. It carries over, because it definitely, that is something that's definitely missed, that organic through osmosis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about that a lot. All right, let's talk a little bit about the steps before an artist is considered for a job. Can you explain to the listeners what scoping is and why it's important to an agency?
Scoping is so important. It's truly outlining, sometimes with a lot of information and sometimes with very little, the time and anticipated budget that's going to go into a project. So for large annual scopes, the actual creative, what we're making, there might not even be a glimmer of a brief at that point, but we try to articulate as best we can a fair baseline and the assumptions that go along with it and the associated effort to make sure that our clients and the creative team and account and all of the folks that are going to go into that are starting from a viable starting point where we can dial up and down as we need based on the details of a project. But that, initial scoping for time, effort, and budget is definitely important. And we try to have them be either as informed as they can be, or have assumptions that can cover the most frequent that we see.
Okay, well, that has to go hand in hand, which, again, we've spoken about it briefly here on the podcast already today, but this idea of a spec sheet. And I think the spec sheet keeps coming up because it is something that IPG Health producers really value, and they're so thorough and so thoughtful. So, can you kind of explain the importance of the spec sheet and how that tool just comes from scoping and then gets sent through to the artists and why it's so important?
Sure. It's the blueprint for everything, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
So yes, thank you. Again, it's wonderful to hear how it's been received on your end from the industry colleagues that rely on it for all of that detailed imagining and planning and the bidding work that goes into a project. We use it from the beginning. We work closely with creative and account so that we can align on goals that are, conceptual goals, the particular needs of a photo campaign in terms of casting talent, set builds, wardrobe, that all important shot list, identifying mandatory shots versus the time permitting shots. It's a tool that we use to converse with our agency colleagues and gain consensus. We communicate that to the artist partners that we are going to bid with. And, it functions as a bit of a checklist at the start, but it's really to encourage full conversation and thought as we consider finishing at the beginning. What assets do we need to come away with? What's the best way to get them all? And that extends to all of the complex CGI and CGI/photo campaigns that we do, illustration, and that, getting it to the finish line, right? So establishing that schedule for making selects and retouching and compositing, it's so critical too. So,
well, and I think another thing that it does for the people on our end it shows that you know what you're talking about, right? Not all photo shoots are, portraits of people against white or, 3 scenarios at 2 different locations over 2 days. Some are incredibly complicated. And especially when you get into CGI and animation and all of that and all the new technology involved, it really does show us, when you talk about your deliverables and, all the different specs that are needed, it shows that you know what you're talking about, which really makes a difference. And it really it saves time too in the process.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, so often we'll explain to teams that we need to start that CGI work in advance of, because we're planning the shoot. We're shooting into that environment that we're creating. The lighting has to be planned. When we're thinking about finishing, we want potential template overlays for the final sizes that we're going into, so that we always shoot plates. We think finishing at the beginning. We want to avoid or limit the number of build outs that we need so that we're shooting enough. So all of that comes into the planning of it. Anything that you are the architect of, whether it's a business plan or a building or a home or a production, it's all in the details.
Yeah, I agree with that. So you did your scoping, you've got your bid sheet. What is the main criteria that you encourage your team to consider when they're evaluating artists to share with the team?
I can't say that there's a main criteria. I think that initially it's what speaks to you. So the producers are constantly evaluating potential partners wherever they find their knowledge, whether it's through communication with reps or independent research. So I say the very first thing is what resonates with you, what makes you feel something. And there's lots of considerations as well. We've certainly focused on providing self-identified collectives or groups through the lens of equity, diversity, and inclusion to make sure that we are being inclusive in at least the list that we provide. So certainly it's a collaboration between creative and production. Sometimes creative teams will have an idea of who they want to work with, or they're asking producers for their feedback. So I think we start off with what speaks to the producer aesthetically. And they're all so generous with each other, sharing lists of artists that they've worked with or dream of working with when they're searching. But every team and project is different. So the producers partner closely with creative to get a sense of what they're looking for, and also the special considerations for a production. There's lots of different photo shoot types, different partner shoot productions. So there's lots to consider for every production.
And how is that list then of the artists shared with the team? Is it through links, over email, or are there meetings to review the artists in depth? Is it part of your share link? How do you share them?
All of the above. I think initially, if it's super early on in the process and we're still considering multiple concepts and they're going through testing, it could be links that are shared to various artists and either just their site or particular work that they've done that resonates. And then there's an exchange back and forth where creative will say, oh, I think these are great, or maybe more of this style. Have you worked with this artist? So creative will come back with some suggestions and there could be conversation. It's really a collaboration. And some creatives absolutely have a vision and know who they might want to bid with. And it's a conversation. But it definitely starts with that initial list of, hey, who do you think could be good for this? And then it begins. The triple bid. Why the triple bid? I mean, I think it's truly a best practice in general for any project. As wonderful as our spec sheet might be, I think there's always areas that can be better articulated and opportunity for refinement. And sometimes you don't know that until you really get into that triple bid where there's things you could have communicated better. So, the artists that we land on to triple bid with, we have full confidence in them creatively and production wise to elevate our campaigns, to make impactful work together. And that triple bid gives opportunity to evaluate and share with our clients and with our teams where the numbers are at. That's really important too, understanding where the budget comes in. So the triple bid serves many purposes.
And how about the creative call? How does it facilitate a deeper understanding or connection between the creatives and the artists? I know you want to ensure that everyone is aligned with their goals and visions, but talk to me about what that looks like on your end.
Well, really, it's the initial place where a shared creative language amongst the artists has the chance to establish itself. Someone's work can certainly speak to you and they can share a bit about themselves, but having that opportunity to connect and for the creative team to share the vision that they have and for the artists that they're looking to partner with, for them to give their impressions, to give their feedback, to share experiences. I think that's often where a lot of magic connection can happen. It's tremendously important.
What makes a successful call and what can go wrong?
I think honesty. You and I have talked in the past about having honest conversations that can sometimes feel challenging, but I think if you approach it with grace and an open heart, every conversation is an opportunity to build a relationship. So whether it's on the project that you're talking about or future ones, I mean, there's many times that our creative teams will ask to see an artist again or bid with an artist that for whatever reason may not have been selected for a given project, but that conversation and that exchange really stayed with them. So finding a way to go through all of the thoughts that you're having and the desire to be able to work on a project, but being in that moment and sharing of yourself in an authentic way, I think every conversation is an opportunity to build a relationship.
Yeah, I kind of want to repeat that every conversation is an opportunity to build a relationship. I tell the artists that I work with all the time that, if we're fortunate enough to get down to the triple bid, right? We're one of the three. That's pretty amazing because who knows how many links you started with, right? And how many artists you've reviewed from the beginning. Yeah. And here we are in this situation where now we have each other's captive attention for maybe an hour for a creative call. When would you have that time with that person? They're not going to give you an hour. I believe me, I sit on the other end of the keyboard and I email lots of people asking for appointments and they're hard to come by. So if you have an opportunity in a creative call, I know it's disappointing when you don't win the job and you've spent a lot of time working, sitting on the calls, working on the treatment, all of those things. But there is a silver lining there that you got, a chunk of someone's time. So you have to really make the best of that time and recognize it for what it is, because I think those creatives and the producers are listening. They're paying attention. And if it's not for this, it's for something else.
For sure. Every exchange is so important. And so I think there's a freedom in that, right? If you put so much pressure on this one call and see it as this only opportunity, that can create a lot of strain in how you communicate. But if you see it as the chance to get to know a team, get to know an agency, and build that relationship, there's a lot of good that can come from it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the treatment now. Do you consider treatments indispensable? Does every project need one?
I think most do. Yeah. I definitely see them as indispensable. We talked a bit about communication and that creating of a relationship between the creatives, between the artists. It's the opportunity for the artist to communicate to the agency team how they have received and interpreted what we've briefed them on, to share with words, with visuals, and of themselves and their experiences that bring them to the potential of working on a campaign. I think it's also, again, why so much care goes into that initial work, whether it's our specs or how we communicate the bid, because we really do understand the work that it takes for everyone who's participating in the process.
And how does the producer ensure that the direction given for the treatments are clear, consistent, and equitable for all artists?
I think producers definitely, as busy as they are, they make it a priority to be available to answer any questions, whether it's the rep or the producer, the photographer's producer, artist producers, well before the creative call. That the master spec sheet that we create, that's exactly what's shared with each artist and their rep. So through conversation, if there's any change or update that we identify through conversation, through discovery, we make, and anything that changes that impacts those specs, those are updated and shared out again to make sure what we're communicating is equal across the board. So we're working from that same blueprint.
Yeah, that's great. I love to hear that. Treatments have become a bit of a hot button issue for sure, especially over the last couple of years. And the AMA, the Artist Management Association, has been kind of starting to champion that conversation. And we're inviting, just kind of as an aside for some of our listeners, we're inviting a bunch of our AMA members to a roundtable discussion to kind of figure out what those hot button issues are and kind of come up with a template, not a template, but a kind of an outline for some best practices for agencies and for artists to follow when creating and asking for treatments. And we're going to be working with a photo editor to extend that conversation and then have a larger webinar where we invite agency producers on to get their opinions and points of view and insights so that as an industry, we can kind of come together and figure out how to do exactly what you're saying, making it equitable, sharing the right amount of information, making sure that people are, feeling like their time is valued and all of those things. So keep your ears and eyes open for that.
Well, that's fantastic and incredible work that can impact a lot of the effort that goes in. So I'll keep my ears open for that.
Definitely. I will keep you updated. Okay. So now we've gotten through the treatment and there is the wonderful, amazing award call if you're fortunate enough to receive that. What are the primary factors that influence the decision when awarding a job to a particular photographer?
I think obviously it depends on the needs of a project and it can run the gamut. For example, if we know that a partner shoot will be particularly demanding and that time for photo considerations are going to be extremely limited, or there's a need for flexibility in terms of when we capture and what we capture, we would, certainly seek out experienced photographers with the desire and ability to work on partner shoots. Obviously, we factor that in as part of our initial search, and that might be a deep focus of our initial vetting and conversation when we know how complex a partner production might be. So
when you're presenting to your client, do your teams share the bids with them and the treatments? Why or why not?
Yeah, we do. It's our standard to share bids and treatments with our clients. It's definitely a collaborative process. And it's just as exciting to our clients as it is to the agency. Again, I think everyone remembers that we are still getting to create art together, and that's quite beautiful.
And how does client feedback factor into the award?
It's important. The team articulates what spoke to them, in regards to the artist's work and their treatment. When we're talking about that creative call, there's that opportunity there to articulate anything that really resonated coming out of the creative calls. And it's absolutely, client feedback is tantamount to all. But it's partnership. They really trust our creative teams and look for their counsel and their insight. And so it's kind of beautiful to see them and us work together and align on who we're going to partner with.
And how do your teams approach? It's such a delicate task, right? Of notifying photographers who weren't selected for a project. Is there a specific protocol maybe or a method that you encourage them to follow?
I think every producer would like to think back on all of their experiences and think that they handle it with grace and consistency. So much effort and heart goes into the treatment, creative call, the bidding process on everyone's side. So I certainly for myself, I wouldn't lie. It can be a hard conversation to have when you have compassion and understanding or excitement. So I think it goes back to those relationships, the ones that you build with the reps and with the artists and photographers, producers. There are relationships that extend beyond that particular project. So as hard as they are to have, I think that genuine and sensitive conversation is preferable to maybe finding it out over an email or a text. Even if it's a quick conversation, I think it honors that effort. And I'd like to think we've all done that with grace and consistency, but it's important.
It is important. I think you've nailed all the really important aspects of it. And I'd like to, any reps out there listening, I think I would also remind them of, or emphasize one of the things that you said about having your team make the phone call, even if it's a quick conversation. I think it is up to us as reps to recognize that it isn't an easy conversation for them to have. And while I desperately need the information, especially given the amount of work that has gone into it and the amount of people that have put time into it, and the collective hours are enormous lately, I also need to recognize that it is a hard conversation for the art producer. And I want to be respectful of their time and very appreciative of the fact that they actually took the time to call me and talk to me about it and, make it a little easier on them, not make it I don't know. I just feel like the relationship should go both ways in that. If you're being graceful enough to call me, and make sure I'm respectful of your time and, ask the pointed questions and then be done with the conversation.
Well, I think your questions are always so open, and we've certainly had conversations just about production and how things have gone. And I think it's that openness and directness where you understand that it is in the environment of a relationship. So there's trust there.
Yeah.
And it can make the hard words a little bit easier when you understand that the goal is a common one, to make beautiful work and make those exchanges better. So I appreciate that aspect of you very much.
Well, thank you. So once a photographer is awarded a job, there's often this expectation to begin production immediately, right? Everything is so fast nowadays. Yeah. How does your group balance this urgency with the need to finalize terms and conditions? It's something I'm wrestling with right now, and it's very difficult. What advice, what's the protocol in place, or what advice do you give your team? How is it handled at your place?
I mean, I think to have as much established in the beginning, obviously that sounds like such an ideal situation, but there are a lot of approvals that are needed on our end, being a large agency, where it does add the opportunity for planning and weigh-in. So the producers really do all they can in advance to ensure, if it's from the beginning, our NDAs, the vendor setup, our estimates, purchase orders, advances, those all take a lot of time. So having as much worked out in the upfront as possible so we can hit the ground running together is important. Again, it's not always perfect, but laying that groundwork ahead of time as much as possible gives somewhat of a smooth start because of all the approvals that are needed. So I'd say, as always with everything, but preparation is key.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, no surprise here, your team is really good at that. There's a lot of other teams where I'm asking, hey, I know we might not get awarded the job. We're just a triple bid here, but I'd love to see the terms and conditions now so that I can, have the time for my legal team to review it or my artist to review it and be ready when it is time, if we're fortunate enough to be awarded the job, to, move quickly. And a lot of times, people aren't willing to share, or there's a lot of process involved with it. And they're like, well, I'm not going to share them until we get the job awarded. And so I appreciate on your end that you guys are thinking ahead that way, because it's not, I'd say all the terms and conditions are a lot more complicated now. And it's not as easy as just signing it and moving on. There's usually some back and forth.
And that back and forth is definitely a lot of effort on our team's end as well. So anything that can be done to establish those things beforehand, it benefits everyone because there are all different parties that need to weigh in. So
yeah,
sooner the better.
I agree. I agree with that. Okay, well, we're kind of winding down, and I'd love to ask you, just one question about the future. AI is on everyone's brain, and no one really knows what it's going to mean and how it's going to affect anything. And you don't really have to have a firm answer on this, but I would just love you, Sandra Gomez. I'd love your thoughts on AI.
I think it's incredibly exciting. I mean, how can you not be excited about the opportunity just from the perspective of being more efficient? There's so many different tools out there, and there's much to consider and continually learn. So I see it as an incredible tool. Obviously, it comes with myriad considerations and all of the ways that it impacts artists and output. But ultimately, like any amazing tool in capable and responsible hands, it has the ability to make a tremendous impact, and it has already. So I think be open, always be a sponge, always be open to learning and letting go of things you thought you knew, and hearing different perspectives and learning new technology. We're ever evolving. So
yeah, I think that's good advice because we don't know exactly where it's going to go and how it's going to affect everything. And there's a lot of hand wringing out there, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? How's it going to affect things? But I think the most important part at this stage is to just be knowledgeable. Even if you're knowledgeable, to speak against it, right? You have to understand it in order to speak on either side of it. So you don't have to be pro AI. You don't have to like it at all, but you have to be knowledgeable enough to know what you're talking about because the world is going to progress and understand it. And if you're left behind not understanding it, now's the time to ask the questions. Now's the time to play with it. Now's the time to experiment. All of those things later on, people are going to be beyond your ability. And it's just really important, I think, to just be able to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Perpetual curiosity will serve anyone well. And so I think it's super important to stay open and curious.
I agree. Well, we are winding down here. And for the last 100 episodes, I have asked the same 2 questions of every one of my guests. And now I have to think about if I'm going to change those questions up for the next 100 episodes. But you get the honor of answering them for the last time. I may even have to email you, Sandra, and ask you to be the one to write the next 2 questions.
No, that's a pressure and honor all at once.
But I'd love for you to answer these questions. What is your favorite thing to do on a Sunday? And if you weren't a producer, what would you be?
Well, hopefully I can give these last 2 answers the justice it deserves. My favorite thing to do on a Sunday, I would say you could probably find me on the hunt, whether it's virtual or in real life, for archive fashion. A passion project of mine for about the last 7 years has been capturing and communicating the body of work by the artist Larry Legaspi. So certainly if you find any pieces, Heather, give me a call and let me know.
Okay. I will.
If I wasn't a producer, what would you be? I'm not sure. I think producers are producing in a lot of ways, regardless of where they find themselves in their career and in their life. If you ask any producer, often they are the producer, whether it's vacation or or celebrations. So, I've seen some of the most impeccable pre-pro books that producers have put together for their quote unquote downtime.
Yeah.
And those are in and of themselves a work of art, right? Ensuring that they've solidly planned for everything and making space for everyone's discovery and making sure that each person gets to find their pockets of joy and recharge. So not sure what I'd be doing, but I'd probably be producing something.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful perspective because I think once you're a producer, you're just always a producer. And I don't think you learned to be a producer, therefore you produce everything else in your life. I think it just comes really naturally to people. And I've, talked to 100 people on this podcast, and they all have very different paths to the role that they currently play in our industry. And all of them encompass all those words that you spoke about earlier: joy, cleverness, resourcefulness, supportiveness, inclusion. And they do it because they almost can't not do it, right? It's part of who they are, and it just seeps into every aspect of their lives. So if you ever are not a producer, I would be very interested to see how you are producing your life otherwise. So
well, you just gave me chills because I think it's so true. If you are a producer, it's part of your DNA. So yes, if I find myself producing something wild and different, I'll let you know where I land.
Okay. Well, you're part of a pretty magnificent club, Sandra, and I'm just honored that you were willing to be our 100th guest today. And I'm honored to have worked with you and stood next to you and to call you a friend. So thank you for absolutely everything that you give to our industry. And I look forward to seeing you sometime soon.
Likewise, it was my pleasure. Thank you, Heather.
You are welcome.